Anybody got time for doing nothing but listening to the Powell Movement?
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week it's back to school. It's a big time of year. If you have kids, they are out of the house, unless you homeschool them, which I totally question. If you're a football fan, football's back. And if you're a fan of skiing and snowboarding media like me, it's time for ski media to start arriving in our mailboxes. So I decided I would bring on Jeff Galbraith. Jeff's a publisher who's done everything you can possibly do when it comes to printing words and images about snow on paper. From interning at Transworld to working for International Snowboarder Magazine, Snowboarder, and eventually starting his own publications, First Frequency, which became the Snowboarder's Journal in 2016. He also has the Ski Journal and the Fly Fish Journal. Jeff is a legend in the world of print, and we talk about his past, present, and the future of his industry in the podcast. Before I get into it, I'm going to talk a little bit about me and what's been going on in my life. As everyone should know by now, because I say it way too much, I'm Jewish. And like all good Jews, I get super excited when I get free stuff that I actually want. So whenever I get a box from Spy with sunglasses or Stanley with pint glasses or 10 Barrel with beer or the gift cards that Evo sends over, that stuff is way more exciting than when their check arrives for their ad buys. Recently, I was connected to another brand who has a product I love, but on my podcaster's salary, it's more a nice to have than something I could actually purchase. The product is a wood-fired grill, and the brand is Traeger, and if you haven't heard of them, well, they are the shit. Did I say that? Yes, because they are not paying me. They did send me a wood-fired grill, and from the second they told me they were sending it, I was excited. When it arrived yesterday, my mind was fucking blown. They paid so much attention to detail on this product. It's really amazing. So my grill gets here yesterday. I call famous ski artist and good friend Ryan Schmies to come over and help set up. Ryan did most of the work. I watched because that's what a good Jew does on the job site, and we set the grill up in about 30 minutes. I am so excited to use this grill, but I can't yet. I have Iron Maiden with my kid tonight. Then I'm off to Bend for some hot bike action over the weekend. And then I've got a podcast in Portland on Monday. Then I'll finally be back in Seattle to smoke some motherfucking meat. God, I'm excited and this thing is so cool. So my world is all about a sausage party or a meat party from here on out as I've got the new Traeger and I'm so fired up if you can't tell. Now it's time for me to ask you guys to do some things which a lot of you won't do, but I always ask. First, I want you to follow me on Instagram, @ThePowellMovement. Next, I want you to subscribe to my podcast. It's so easy to do. Just click subscribe on most platforms and you're done. And finally, if you have anything you want to share with me, I finally have an email address. It's mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will get back to you. We all know this whole thing is not about me, so now it's time to talk with Jeff Galbraith. Your nickname, I hear it's the Walrus. How do you get that nickname?
Who told you? I'm curious. That would place it for me, time-wise.
Pat Bridges.
Okay, perfect. I think it was Ari Markopoulos originally. We're traveling somewhere, probably in Europe or something, with Bronkhart and Donahue and maybe Jamie, that crew I used to roll with. And I was probably moving a little slow in the morning for Ari's taste to get out there, which is moving pretty slow. And he just said, "You goddamn walrus, get off the couch, let's get going." And I'm not a small man, so, they just kind of stuck with it. And then we actually used that. We did a movie for Volcom back in the day, this crazy movie called The Walrus Dreams. And I don't know, it just kind of sprung from there.
And the title was your name?
Yeah. Ari just liked the ring of it, like the sound of it.
Do a lot of people call you that?
No, when anybody calls you that, I'm kind of like, oh, well, that's Snowboarder Magazine or somewhere thereabouts related in the 90s.
Okay. We're going to jump into your life. I usually do a whole bunch of small talk in the beginning, but we don't need to do a whole bunch of small talk. We've met before. We know each other a little bit. And I think you grew up in Everett.
Yeah, I went to Cascade High School in Everett and lived in kind of the Mill Creek area.
And your family has deep roots in Washington snow culture, I believe. Is your grandfather the mountain manager over at Alpental?
Yeah, he and 6 of his friends from Tacoma were the original founders of Alpental. He was an owner, but he was a sweat equity guy. He was, small share. And he was the first mountain manager up there. late 60s, early 70s.
Well, so he was there right when it started.
Yeah, he built it. He and his friends built it.
Did your parents work in that industry as well?
No, they're both school teachers. So we probably would have had more difficult access to skiing and ski areas. I would not have that opportunity. So we're grateful that my grandpa ran the show. We got to go up there and go skiing.
Were there any special perks to having a grandpa who ran the mountain? Did you get up early and did you get days that other people didn't?
I was pretty young, so it wasn't like I was necessarily like frothing at the gate to get the POW. I mean, I was doing Mighty Mites and doing racing and that kind of stuff on the small time level. But back then, the season passes were just name tags. They didn't have a photo or anything. They just had like your name on it.
Yep.
And if you were part of ownership or management, you had a gold tag. And so I had this little gold tag, I remember. And I cut ropes and didn't think twice about it in terms of like getting from cat track to cat track or whatever.
And how often are you going up to the hill when you're young?
I think we went up most weekends. My grandparents had a little condo up there, and sometimes we stay up there. Most times we just go up for the day and come back.
These days you're a publisher and you have a huge portfolio of writing to your credit. Writing is not easy. Is that something that you're focused on at an early age? Were you like a writing nerd from the get-go?
Yeah, I always wrote. That was something that came naturally to me. I did band. I wasn't particularly great at music. I enjoyed it. I did sports. There were some sports I was better at than others, but writing was something that always came naturally to me. I was always on newspaper, even junior high and high school and then college. And so did a journalism degree, and it's just something I've always done.
So you've always known that you wanted to get into the business of writing, maybe not publishing right away, but you knew writing was something you loved.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been a writer. How that manifests itself professionally is a different deal, but I do my best I can to be a publisher every day. At my heart, I'm a writer.
Okay. What other extracurricular activities is a young Jeff Galbraith involved in high school?
I love skateboarding. I'd kind of gotten burned out on skiing a little bit from just a little bit of racing. I wasn't that great at it. And skiing kind of went from this fun thing to all of a sudden people are yelling at you when you're going around gates. So I kind of gravitated more towards skateboarding at that point. I hadn't really seen snowboarding yet. I was doing sports.
This is what, early 80s?
Yeah, I would graduate in 86. Junior high and high school, I did track. I wrestled. I was a wrestler in junior high and high school.
Do you miss getting on the mat with another man?
I like one-on-one competition. I play squash now. I like the idea you walk out of a mat, you look someone in the eye, and you're like, it's you and me. I'm going to take you down. Let's go. I get that with squash now if I play squash, although I usually get taken down by those guys.
In your wrestling days, you learn how to take people down. Have you been in many fights where you've used wrestling later on in life?
One and one only.
Did you win?
I subdued the other individual and they removed him from the bar, which is all I really cared about.
Yeah, wow. You're 1-0. That's pretty good. In your high school days, on to college, the music scene in Seattle is blowing up and you are right around here. Are there bands that you're seeing that we all knew about, but you're here living it?
Yeah, I wasn't in bands. I actually was in a band, but it was so bad it's not worth mentioning. Okay. But my friends were in bands that were pretty good and they got to play some opening acts for some good bands. And yeah, being here at that time, I saw Nirvana play in the Western Gym here when they did it like surprise opener for Mudhoney. I remember going with Logic. We went and saw kind of a cool little underground show. They had it on one of the piers in Seattle. It was the Breeders, Nirvana, and Cypress Hill.
Whoa.
And then, saw Soundgarden play Bumbershoot. I saw a lot of those bands playing like the Central and played little tiny bars before that stuff blew up. And I'm good friends I grew up with the singer for Gas Huffer, Matt Wright. Actually, that kind of led to my connection in a lot of ways with meeting Pete and Mike from Mervyn, because Matt was in a band with this other guy, Matt Leslie, whose brother is in fact Mervyn Winston Leslie III, who is the namesake of the company. And he was the original partner as well with Pete and Mike. And he just decided he was going to keep doing construction, all that snowboarding stuff. Who knows how that's going to pan out. So they named the company after him just so they could keep him part of it. And he had the only half pipe around. They just lived up on 164th on the way to Linwood. Matt told me about it, Matt Wright. So I started skating there, and then I met Matt and then Win, and then met Pete and Mike from there. That was kind of my intro to snowboarding in a lot of ways.
So skate is where a lot of your friends were based out of when you were growing up?
Yeah. I didn't snowboard until like my senior year. They were out there, but I saw snowboarding once at Snoqualmie, maybe late high school, and it was some kids on Burton's. It was just rock hard ice, and it just looked not fun at all. And then I think it was probably one of those early Sims videos. And then I was skating for a shop. I was sponsored by a shop in Everett, and they had some guys they started sponsoring for snowboarding. And I was like, I got to do this. So I bought a Sims 1500 Swallowtail from one of those guys and went up to Baker. This would have been 86 or something like that. I just right away was like, oh yeah, this skiing background and skating, it just clicked. I was starting to surf then a little bit too. I was trying to decide between this little private school in Santa Barbara that my mom really wanted me to go to because it was a nice little Christian school, or Western. I was either going to go surf or go snowboard, basically. I decided to come up here and go to Baker.
Was your family religious growing up?
Not super religious, but they went to church. And my mom's side of the family is Sephardic, which is, I was listening to that. I didn't realize that you were Jewish. And I didn't realize that Russell was such a Jewophile as well. But my mom's side of the family is old Sephardic Seattle family. And then my dad's side was Presbyterian. I grew up more in the Presbyterian church, but diverse background.
Half chosen.
Yeah, half chosen, exactly.
Yeah. My kid's like that.
Yeah.
You end up picking Western and you studied journalism, I think, in college, and I'm sure you study Mountain Baker as well. And the snowboard scene is starting to, I won't say explode because it's still early on, but the epicenter of West Coast snowboarding is starting to be Mount Baker. There's Mount Baker Hardcore. There's a lot of people riding. And who are you riding with at that point?
The guys I started with were from Arlington. It was just 3 dudes that rode for this shop, and they started taking me up to Baker, and then quickly got to be friends and started riding with Dan Donnelly and Jeff Fulton, Carter Turk, Eric Jenko, all those guys. And it was closed midweek, so it would open on Friday and snow all week, and you'd be like maybe 20, 25 snowboarders on the hill total. It was just a magical time.
And those are some legendary names you're throwing out there. Did you realize that something was brewing at Mount Baker that the world was going to see more?
The vibe was undeniable. It's hard to even describe. It was like every day we knew there could be something that no one had done before. It would be like Rank would do 540 stalefish off that. I don't know. It was just incredible energy, incredible vibe. And every day was just something new and magical could happen.
Dan Donnelly, Jeff Fulton, are they sponsored pros at that point? Are there even that many sponsored pros out there?
Yeah, but at that time, I mean, the definition of sponsored pro was like no one had anything going like T-Rice or anything like that. I remember later after Craig passed away, his dad, Pat, telling me that his first contract with Burton, at that point, we were all like, Craig is getting paid. He said his first contract was $18,000 a year. So mostly it was free boards. Craig got checks, which was insane. And then Dano, at some point, he was on Gnu, and then he got on K2 and he started getting paid something. But most of those guys, you know, Fulton, Carter, Janko, those guys, the early guys that really push it off the dock, those guys never got any money out of it. But, you know, they're still doing it.
It seems like that with everything is the forefathers of the sport bleed for it, don't see anything, and then everybody else reaps what they created.
Yeah, but we reaped pretty good at that time for just getting it, you know, like at a level now that I don't want to be too cantankerous back in the day, but there's great days too. I mean, kids get insanely good days when, you know, I'm sleeping in, but just the ratio of days where you just go up there on a Friday or early Saturday and just, you know, the idea of side country or back country wasn't even in our minds because we didn't need it.
So the culture's blowing up at this point. How are you making ends meet? Because you're in school. I don't know if your parents are floating you money to get by. Are you working?
I worked during the summers and my folks helped out, but it was pretty strict. I had to make at least half of it every summer or throughout the year. I had to meet my end or I wasn't going back. So I lifeguarded during the summer for Snohomish County, worked as a lifeguard at the Western Pool up here, worked at a sandwich shop in town, worked at a ski shop.
Is this around the same time that you start putting your zine together?
I was after college. I graduated in 4 years. I knocked it out in 4 years and got a low-level snowboard sponsorship at that time. I was like a GNU C team.
Free boards and feel good?
The test boards that didn't work out, real stiff tails, but I loved it. And was working at this kind of close-out low-end ski shop in town, just hustling. And then, yeah, I decided I just wanted to do a zine. All my friends were in bands, and I wasn't in a band. So I did my zine, sold ads to it, and it was, wow, that worked out.
And is that just because you love writing? You're not a publisher at that point. Given you're learning a lot about publishing, I would think, by producing a zine, even though you don't realize you're learning. But is that just so you can have a creative outlet for what your art is?
Yeah, completely. I had friends that were doing really cool skate zines, you know, like Pool Dust. To me, was like one of the coolest things that anyone's ever done. There wasn't any snow zines. There was one up in Alaska called Warning. There was a couple that were out there, and I was like, you know, we need a snow zine, so I just did it.
This does well. I think it's a success from the start, but it's just a little zine, and you're a young dude just messing around, and it's more of a passion project than anything. Is that how you start making industry contacts and get to know people?
No, before that, I did an internship with Transworld during college. So up at the race, I had dislocated my shoulder. I was actually kind of sidelined, but I was helping be a gatekeeper or something. And I was, you know, a journalism major. I was at Western. I was going to graduate in the next 24 months. And so I knew those guys were up there, and I just kind of worked up the gumption, knocked on their hotel door, and just introduced myself to Kevin Kinnear and Guy Motil and those guys and said, yeah, I'd love to come down and intern with you. And they're like, sounds good. Let's keep it on the radar. And then I set up through the school. So I went and interned in Oceanside for a summer, came back up, and then worked for ISM for part of that year, then did the zine. So I worked for International Snowboard Magazine up here.
Writing?
Yeah, I was on retainer as like a senior editor. I was writing. I was going up, kind of stringing around for them.
And that's the first major snowboard magazine.
Yeah. They were like the Thrasher. They're out of San Francisco, and they were a little harder edge and pretty cool core publication. They struggled. Tom was having trouble making a go of it. He pulled the plug on that. Then I was just back to working at the ski shop, just kind of hanging out. I worked for a little bit with a Canadian publication called Concrete Powder. Chris Bronkhart was working on that and did the zine, and we're just hustling, and did a couple pieces for Snowboarder Magazine. And then Doug Palladini, who was editor at the time, I think he's VP at Vans now or something, but he really liked it and hired me to do some more work. I did some more work, and then he ended up hiring me as a senior editor, which I stayed up here for another year and then moved down to North County, San Diego, and commuted up to Orange County, up to the old Surfer offices, and did that for about 4 years.
Go back to interning. Do they let you do much when you're an intern at Transworld?
Oh, yeah. Like Lee Crane and I pretty much did the magazine. Those guys, they acted as much publisher as editor, and they gave good direction, but they were smart enough to let Lee and I do a lot of it, and there was a lot to do. This is before like the 300-page era of the 90s, but there's still solid 200-page plus magazines, you know.
And you're really hungry. You're like, I'll do whatever you want me to do.
I was like, great. Buyer's guides, writing 300 pages on edges. Sounds great. Let me go.
And I heard that when you eventually do get this job with Snowboarder, that you had sent them a critique of one of their issues and pretty much told them what was wrong with it. And that's how you get your foot in the door to do a test story.
Yes, that is true. I was interning at Snowboarder.
Transworld, right?
Transworld, sorry. I'm sitting around one day, bored and hot, angry young man. And then we get this Upstart mag that comes in, and I just went through and copy edited the whole thing, just kind of eviscerated it, and then sent it back to Palladini. I initialed it at the bottom. He held on to it, and the Oceanside address, it was like, there's nowhere else this is coming from. And then on the return stamp.
Yeah.
And then looked at the masthead and lined up JG. I'm like, okay, mystery solved. And then Palladini sent me a copy of that letter back saying, why would you ever want to write for a bunch of kooks like us? So he's basically put me on the spot where I had to tell him why you guys are cool enough for me to want to write for you now again or whatever. And it was a good exercise. And we went up to Mount Cain up on Vancouver Island, had a great story. It was a good piece. And Palladini dug it and said, I want you to come work here.
So you get the job and they let you stay up here in Washington for the first year.
Yeah.
Is there a disconnect when you're up here? Because I would think it's much easier when you're in-house and you can have the face-to-face with people every day.
I was able to affect the publication itself more when I was on site, when I was down there. But I think it was probably helpful for them at first to have me up here because it gave them a greater connectivity to snowboard culture. They were basically an offshoot of Powder when they first started. That was good, I think, that I was up there for a while before I came down. Then once you're there, yeah, you have more effect once you're in-house.
Do they make you move down there? Or are they like, hey, man, to make this thing work, we need you here?
If I wanted to keep that job, I was moving down there. That was clear enough. And I was ready to go. I mean, I grew up here all my life. I'd had a few kind of personal tragedies. A friend of mine was killed in a house fire. Another friend of mine was killed in a car wreck. And it was good for me to go elsewhere and breathe for a bit.
What's the life experience like when you go to LA? Is it total culture shock?
Yeah, I'd been there going to old ASR shows and having interned down there. But I hadn't done the full like highway commute up to Orange County and everything. I actually liked being down there and being close to the beach and surfing. There was good people and everything. I think it was just hard for me. A lot of times I came across as angry young man because I'd gone through some heavy personal tragedies, hadn't really had a chance to process it. And all of a sudden I'm down there. We're literally doing 300-page issues and there's a staff of 2. And everybody in the world's hanging their marketing hat on snowboarding at that time.
This is like 93?
Yeah. So again, it's kind of going from the music scene of Seattle where there's like this crazy energy. And then same thing at Baker that continues down there. Now snowboarding at large is blowing up in this huge way. And it was a crazy dynamic, to feel like you're one of the cultural gatekeepers of that at that time, which I didn't necessarily sign up for that. I liked writing about it. I liked reflecting on it. I was never necessarily comfortable with having to go to, I don't know, hard to explain. When you go to a major event and then you're dealing with a bunch of people that have nothing to do with snowboarding.
And you're looked at as the expert.
Right. And the translator and everything else. And I hit a point where I was like, this is cool, but really I just want to go snowboarding and write about it.
Were you in an office with Powder and Surfer, and were you looked at as that other magazine?
Yeah, at first I think in some ways it was, but then it became much bigger than the other publications, and we were making way more money because we had no staff, and there was some angst in the building for sure. I got along well with everyone there. I didn't really have any bad relations, Casimiro may have been a little frosty at first, but he was kind of a little frosty at first to everyone. But I have great friendships from that era still. I love Dave Reddick. I love Rob Story.
Did you work with the Powder guys a lot?
Yeah, I wrote some stuff for Powder.
Was that a conflict of interest or a personal thing for you where you're a snowboard guy, given you grew up skiing, but you are an expert per se in that building on snowboarding and you know the culture, and then they're going to ask you to write about skiing, where in the Northwest there might not be that big ski-snowboard rivalry because people don't give a fuck, but it's out there in the world and you have to write for the enemy.
I never quit loving skiing. I didn't ski. I took a break from skiing, but I always thought skiing was super cool. And I was really good friends, like Tori Bland, who skis for LibTech still, is like a great friend of mine, one of the best skiers up at Baker. And he skied with Bass and Loeb and all those guys were snowboarding. There was never that thing with us. And I always understood that skiing was a more technical sport. It's just cool. So actually the first piece I did for Powder was the first time I went skiing in 10 years.
Okay.
I went back to Snowbird. I used to go there a lot snowboarding. I was friends with Hetzel and Palmer and all those guys. And I took a pair of Libs, first edition Libs back in the 90s, and then went and skied for a few days. And I loved it. I run around more in my snowboard boots because I have a 5-year-old. She's easier to chase down the lodge in my snowboard boots.
Yep.
But I love skiing.
What are the challenges of making a magazine in the non-digital world? Because everything's changed today, but back then there was probably things that took a lot longer to do.
Yeah, responses, answers for things like getting an ad contract. It's easier to blow off voicemails, I think, than texts.
Yeah.
And plus we're a new product. So that initial trying to get a Burton contract or, trying to get the initial Patagonia contract or something like that. It's a lot of work to get there. And then at that time, just seemed like more layers of communication versus now you can get a quicker response to yay or nay and move forward on things. Now it's a less competitive landscape on the print side, but overall in media, it's a far more competitive landscape. At that time, we had 5-6 other magazines. We had to be able to get our hands up in the air higher and be able to say, okay, look, you guys should really support us for these reasons. Now you may only have 1 or 2 other publications in each space, but every other brother is a media company now. There's challenges in all eras. Print's definitely not dead. You look at things like us and Surfer's Journal that are in a format that makes sense, but media period is just not an easy road.
And I was more thinking in the layout and creating the actual production, where nowadays, I don't know how long it takes, but it did take tenfold back then.
Yes and no. It's funny. I interned at Transworld. That was the one and only issue I was ever involved in. The last issue they did, they printed off a digital file. They'd send a file to the printer, and I think the printer would print that and make the plates off of that. But it was actually shot with stack cameras. The whole thing was cutting,
how they used to do it.
How they used to do magazines, from the 20s onward. I don't know if that was actually more labor intensive, but probably not more time consuming in terms of you work with more vendors in the digital world. So you got to get your color separator, it gets back to you, have issues with that. Maybe we'll switch this around.
So it's less in your control now?
The biggest difference is the photography itself. Not having to ship slides back. That's expensive and that's a pain and that's.
Don't lose one or you'll get sued.
I don't miss that world at all. The production aspect has probably been made easier by that stuff, but it's more moving parts, not less moving parts, that's for sure.
Now it is time for me to take a quick sponsor break. My first sponsor is Evo. And if you haven't been to Evo stores in Seattle, Portland, Denver, or Whistler, or visited their website, evo.com, you are missing out on the best deals in action sports and beyond. Evo has something for everyone in the family, and they always have a great sale going on. They carry all the best brands in bike, surf, skate, wake, ski, and snowboard, and have all the clothing and outerwear you'll need for your adventure, or just to look great when it's time to head back to school or the bar. Right now, you can find some great end-of-season deals on bikes and surfboards, and check out all the new ski and snowboarding gear that's hitting the floor daily over at Evo. Evo offers free shipping on orders over $50, a low price guarantee, and a no-hassle return policy. Please support the show by buying everything you need from Evo. My next sponsor is Stanley, another iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. While we all know Stanley for creating that iconic green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, They still do that and a lot more these days. They still are all about adventure. They still are all about keeping your beverages hotter or colder than any other product ever created. And they have always been the right choice when it comes to the planet. If you are still using single-use plastics for your beverages, it's time to make a change for the environment. And now I'm making it easier than ever to do that. You can save 30% on all Stanley products when you head on over to stanley-pmi.com, buy some stuff. When you check out, enter the code Powell, the number 30, that's all one word, and you're done. I should also mention that when you buy from Stanley, you are also supporting cool projects like this podcast and the new movie from Matchsticks Productions. Those are my sponsors. Now we will jump back into the podcast. In your snowboarder days, one of the big stories in snowboarding at that time was it's coming to the Olympics. And you had written a critical piece on the FIS. They did not like that. And when you applied for a credential at the Olympics, what did they say to you?
Who? What? I wrote a piece called Can We Give the Olympics Back? And I still stand by absolutely everything that was in that piece. I don't think that snowboarding has benefited from the Olympics nearly as much as Olympics have benefited from snowboarding.
Maybe individual snowboarders have, but the sport, maybe not.
Is Travis Rice hurting for money these days, you think?
No, but I'm just saying there's some guys in that Olympic category of snowboarding that have made a career out of it. They might not be looked at as your average snowboarder that people like to buy magazines for, but there's dudes that are millionaires out there from contests.
I'm not sure that if it wasn't part of the Olympics, but the X Games were as robust, perhaps more robust, because they didn't have that competition, I think those people would make just the same money.
Yeah, fair enough. So they shut you down when it's time for you to get a pass, but you still go on that trip to the Olympics because you're Snowboarder Magazine, and if snowboarding is going to be in the Olympics for the first time, you guys are going to cover it because you're snowboarder. Do you have to go there with fake mustaches and try to sneak into events, or what happens there?
I bought a ticket. I sat in the bleachers in the rain.
Yeah, it was the most miserable contest snowboarding's ever seen, I think.
It was horrible. It was sheet lightning. It was rain. We were all sitting on these, it was scaffolding everywhere. It was like any other situation, like a golf tournament. Lightning strikes like 2 courses away. They shut it down, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're sitting amidst sheet lightning coming down and like all this gear. And it's like, yeah, snowboarders, whatever, get it done.
Was it pretty much everything you thought it was going to be when you wrote the piece?
Yeah, I mean, I have a conflicted relationship with the Olympics because, like, I think a lot of people do, because that and that FIFA are the 2 most corrupt sports bodies in the world, unquestionably.
Yep.
And in a lot of those cases, the athletes are so taken advantage of to the detriment of the sports that it's just hard to get excited about it. At the same time, you're creating this incredible international event that is peaceful. All those warm, fuzzy feelings are there. I remember getting on the train, coming from Narita Airport all the way up. It was like 3 lines. And by the end of it, we're on these local lines where there's no English anywhere. I'm just completely burnt and fried and starving. And it's like, I remember this older woman coming up to me and just breaking out this bento lunch and just setting me up and being really gracious. And it's because it's the Olympics and they knew what people were there for. All that stuff is great. And I'm glad I had a chance to get experience, but we just bought tickets. Literally, they were the cheapest tickets at the games. I think we paid less than $50. I think we paid like $30 a piece to sit with less people that would have been for one of my high school football games for sure. And the judging was bad, but the writing was pretty good. And it was a great vibe. It was a fun time. You know, it's the only time I've been in Japan. I got to go snowboarding over there and my friends were over there. So I'm really glad I did it. It was cool for sure. But I'm glad I did it independently. I'm glad I didn't get a press pass now.
Hearing you say it's the only time you've been to Japan, you are a publisher who has 3 titles. 2 of them depend on Japan for a lot of footage every year in January, February. How have you only been there once?
I don't know. Other stuff kept coming up. I've been to Europe a bunch of times. I mean, I went to the first Arctic Challenges when Terry was putting those together up in Norway with Oakley and those guys. So I did that a bunch of times. I've been to Australia and Tasmania. Somehow I haven't made it to New Zealand. I've been to South America a few times. My travel's been good. I got no complaints.
It sounds like you live the dream job. I mean, anybody listening to this and thinking of a dream job, I mean, your chair is one of them, especially at that time. What are you actually doing for the magazine? Is it writing all the articles, laying out all the photos, and making sure everything's perfect?
I was managing editor, so Palladini kind of was the overarching glue that held it together and made sure we were getting ads coming in and did a great job of keeping relations with the advertisers.
So he's paying the bills.
He's paying the bills for sure. I mean, we had ad sales. Like Katie Peck sold the ads. She did a great job of selling ads. The 2 of them were a great combination. And I was running the content. I was feeding the content into the publication. They were doing some films, did some snowboarder TV. So I worked with those guys a bit to conceptualize and put together some stuff like that. Was one art director for both titles, Jeff Darnell, for Powder and Snowboarder. Originally, Reddick was the photo editor for both titles.
I did not know he was a snowboarder photo editor.
He was for the first 2-3 years that Publications was in existence. It was a tight crew.
What dream trips are you going on? Is there one or two that stand out where it was like, man, that was just heaven?
For me, they were all pretty dreamy because, I traveled some as a kid. My parents were school teachers. I'd never been to Europe and we hadn't had a chance to travel. Now they travel, but we hadn't had a chance to travel at that point. So going to Vermont was a dream trip for me in the sense that it was like something completely different. I was ready to go see something different. But I would say of that era, I did a trip to Greece with Dale Rayberg and Jamie Lynn. Charlotte Graves shot the photos. That was an amazing trip. Plus, I got to go see the island my grandfather was born on. He was born on this little island, Rhodes, off the coast of Turkey. That was cool to go check out. And snowboarding was good. It was South Lake Tahoe-ish, and it was good. It was fun. The culture was insane.
How much money a year do you think you're spending on your travel, company dollars? What's a travel budget like for a magazine editor? They
got it cheap. I was just a dirtbag kid. Now I'm a fussy, whiny old guy who wants a good seat on the plane and all that kind of stuff. But at the time, I was like, I didn't care.
Couches and stuff like that?
The tickets were really pretty cheap. You're asking about like Japan. I think the ticket was like $700, maybe less. It might have been closer to $500. We got lodging for like maybe $100 a night, last minute for the Olympics. And the tickets were $30 the event or something. So it was pretty cheap travel at that time.
But you're the guy on all these trips that's picking up the tabs, I would think. No,
the manufacturers. That's what you have team managers for.
Okay.
I had some. Palladini was the guy with the credit card. When I first started out, I didn't have any credit. I don't think I was even old enough to get a credit card. And Palladini had to give me his to use for a while before I finally got my credit. And actually, I lost it in Vegas one year. I think somebody stole it. It did because he was writing charges. And I got back and Palladini was just freaking out. I was like, what? And I'm like, I called in, lost. I didn't want to bother you.
What kind of hours are you working? Are you 50, 60 hours a week?
Yeah, we work pretty solid hours. We got time to surf and time to play, but a lot of us travel too. So when I'm back in the office, when it's production time, you're pumping hours for sure. There's just no two ways about that.
Late nights right before deadlines?
Yeah, I'd come in earlier or work on a weekend if I needed to. I tried to get out of there by 6:30. Those guys after that came in afterwards, Rob Campbell and Sullivan Bridges, those guys would do all-nighters. I never did that stuff. I was more effective if I could show up halfway salient the next morning.
Eventually, you're able to convince them to let you move and still work with the magazine because you go to catch them in, 95 or something like that?
Yeah, that's about right. They actually came to me and said, you're either going to step up to this next level, interacting more with the advertisers, managing budgets, blah, 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 or not. And we went back and forth a bit on the dollars on that. And at some point, I just realized I just really just wanted to get back to the mountains. I was dating a gal in Ketchum at that time. I grew up skiing there a bunch. My family had roots there, so it was an easy jumping off spot to me.
So you're in Ketchum. Are you working for the magazine for the 5 years that you're there?
Yeah. It became increasingly clear to me that there were, to a certain extent, I would write 3 features a year, if that, and at a column that I would write. They were paying me not to work for Transworld.
Okay.
It is awesome being paid not to work.
Yeah, I can imagine. A rumor that I heard at your snowboarder days, you had an intern and it was maybe almost a Bill Clinton situation where you might have hooked up with an intern that you might be married to now.
Fake news.
Totally fake?
Elements of that are true. I was up in Ketchum at that point, and I would come down once or twice a year for edit meetings or whatever. So they had me come down, and actually, she was Jamie Mielhausen's intern because she was an art intern.
Okay.
She was a designer. Jessi Lu, who we're talking about. Jessi Lu loved it at that time. And so I came in that winter because it would have been before the Vegas trade show, back when the trade shows were cool and in Vegas. And she was in back helping build the booth, low-end intern stuff. So she's back there in full coveralls, kind of disheveled. And I was just like, yeah, whatever, and she's asking me about the story of the Olympics and stuff. And I was kind of dismissive. And then I came down again about 3 months later, and it was her last day in the office. She had a second job working in an office. Basically, her job was to pour coffee for Japanese businessmen. And so she's all dolled up, hair done, makeup, and cute skirt and everything. And I'm just like, whoa, who's that? Didn't recognize her at all. And I asked Jamie Mielhausen, I'm like, who is this girl, She's like, oh, she's Jessi Lu. She's great. She's single, yeah. And she was leaving the building, like literally she was going to walk out when I was here again. So I ran out. I'm like kicking the dirt. I'm like, hey, would you like to maybe go to dinner or something? Then we ended up going out got to dinner at the Chart House. Had a great evening, kept dating from there, kind of long distance for a year or two. And then when she graduated from Colorado State, she moved to Seattle with me, and then we got engaged not long after that. But she was never my intern. And I wasn't even in the office.
She was an intern, you were an employee. She left before anything really happened, so I guess that doesn't fall under the Bill Clinton category.
Technically speaking, I had sex with the intern, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, we were asking you that, and that sounds great. You know, whatever, it's a different you're allowed to do that. She is in Ketchum with you at some point, maybe not living there, but she's there. You guys are going to road trip to Seattle.
Yeah.
You've talked with Snowboarder about creating a quarterly for them that's like the Surfer's Journal, similar high-quality quarterly publication. You're on board. You're creating all the content for it. You get your car packed. You're going to move back to Seattle. You're stoked to start this new life. You've got everything ready, and then you get a phone call on the way saying, hey, man, this isn't going to happen anymore.
Yeah, we were in Eastern Oregon, somewhere between like Baker City and Umatilla or something, and got the call from Palladini. It was like really breaking up. Couldn't quite tell. And they had contracted me to do this. I was excited to do it. Like once I heard they wanted me to do it, I'm like, for sure, I'm in.
Not your idea, their idea?
They came to me and contracted me to do it. And then I had gotten the content all lined up at that point. I'd done the legwork. I felt like I'd put my name and my neck out there. And they had just gone through the first buyout with Peterson, which became EMAP. So the first they were looking to expand like crazy. You know, that was right about the beginning of the print plunge for those guys and .com plunge. And it was kind of their first bits of starting to reel it in.
So the first cut was you?
For sure. And I thought about it. I was just like, you know, I've sold ads before. I've done a publication before. You know, I've done every element of it in terms of helping manage. And I put my name on it. So I was going to do it. And I just literally turned to Jess and I said, we're going to do this. And she just kind of nodded and said, all right, let's do this.
And is she going to be your designer? Is that kind of how it's going to go?
Yeah. So she designed the first few issues. The first issue we did at Bronkhart's house in Portland, and he had this really shitty Mac that just completely kept crashing. It was just a complete nightmare. We finally got it together. A bunch of the scans that they'd actually done on low res, we realized once we finally actually sent off to get printed. They were black and white though, and no one ever said anything.
Huh.
So it was a very organic process, but Jess kind of bailed her asses out for sure on the design end of it. And then she kept it on point for the next 10 years or so. And she's still creative director for the publications. She keeps things creatively ball in bounds. And Jesse Gallagher is our art director for all three titles.
So you create this quarterly, you call it Frequency, which means nothing to anybody at that point. How do you get that name?
Smoking in the yurt at Jamie Lynn's. Sitting around and we're trying to think of different names. And we wanted to have a distinctive name rather than have it be Snowboard something, you know? Not
commercial, you want it to be cool?
Yeah, you know, it's the 90s. Also, you got to remember, there was also like 4 or 5 other titles at that time that had snowboard in their name. So it's going to be really hard to be distinctive without having a distinctive name. So at some point, I don't know, it was Jamie or someone just said, Frequency, man, it's the distance between two peaks. And it was like, wow, that's radical.
Sounds like a weed smoking kind of thing.
It definitely served its purposes for launch, for setting us apart. And we ran with the subtitle, The Snowboarder's Journal.
When you think about the back end of a magazine, you probably learned a little bit from your zine. You probably learned a little bit over at Transworld and then at Snowboarder. But I don't think they had you working on the actual creating the magazine. You're writing content. You're not worried about the pressing of it, I don't think, as much as you have to be now. And what's the learning process like?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, especially with like a staff of Palladini, myself, and shared staff of others, it's like I did do everything. I didn't get on Quark at that time and do the designing, but I had not a problem getting into a designer's. I was definitely a managing editor where it was like, we need to do this like this. Or when you do the proofing process, you're looking at, is this lining up or is this not? So I wasn't dumb to the production process at all.
Like the perfect bound part and the stock and worrying about that?
All that stuff wasn't hard to figure out. I knew what a saddle stitch was. I knew what a perfect bind was. If it's not quite right, it takes you a few issues to figure out why that is. But that's actually probably one of the easier vendors. They're all union pressmen. They know what they're doing. It's more a matter of when you figure out that you need to stay out of their way. The hardest part was retail and distribution and building a subscription program, all that. I hadn't had any experience with that. I mean, we literally got a pallet of publications. It was, okay, I guess we should do something with these now. You know, then we were cold calling retailers and then shipping them and building up a sub base. And that's when the work begins.
When you look at the magazine, it's crazy expensive. It's $12.95.
It's underpriced. We're going to raise that. It's been the same price for almost 20 years. So we're way overdue. It would be remiss as a business if we don't do that in the next year. So
I look at it as your $3.95 magazine is your toilet magazine. And your $12.95 magazine sits on your coffee table, and I think that was the intention, was to have a nice, beautiful piece. When you pick up one of your magazines, you can just feel it in the cover weight, and a lot of thought went into the magazine. But it's a different model, and brands, do they have any questions about, hey, man, we're not going to be able to sell $12 magazines?
No. 15 years ago, for sure. 10 years ago, definitely some discussion on that level. 5 years ago, less. Now
no
people get, well, now it's like, well, the people look at it and go, oh, this is the kind of thing that will survive. It is the kind of thing that has survived. Plus, we're selling packages. So someone comes on and we're doing a social media package that comes along with it. We'd be doing sponsorship on a film that comes with that, a live event that maybe come with that.
And you have to do that to be competitive.
Yeah.
Another thing that brands could have questions about is you're releasing a quarterly magazine in a seasonal industry. Is that weird?
Not anymore. On the winter side, we did that for a long while. We fought that as long as we could on the winter side, trying to do it, and it's not viable. So we stretch it as long as possible. The next ski journal will drop next week for the first one.
Okay.
This next year. And then we usually would drop it at the end of January for the trade show for the industry, and then maybe hang on to it for another 2-3 weeks for shipping for consumers, so it can ride the stands through end of the season, through like April.
Okay.
So really, it's pretty much May, June, July, part of August, the months of the year that we don't have publications on the stand on the winter side of things. On the fly fish side of things, we're even quarterly because that's a sport that follows the seasons.
Okay. When you launch Frequency, it's a new magazine in a crowded space because there are a lot of magazines back then. Your digital footprint is non-existent at that point. How do you make noise and let people know you exist?
We may have had a website together by the time we had the first issue out at the trade show. It's entirely possible we didn't have a website. My wife would know, but I think that it may have been like the second issues before we even had a website. But I was listening to Russell's podcast, Winfield's podcast yesterday. He was talking about how strong word of mouth was in that era before social media. And that was really it. Yeah, we went to events. We went to all the contests. We had the writers on our side. I mean, those guys wanted something different. So we have someone like Brian Iguchi or someone like Travis Rice saying, this thing is the real deal. That carries it way further than a bunch of advertising at the trade show or like
party with the band.
Right. Totally. So we didn't really have the budget for that anyways, but it didn't matter because, you know, you had Terry and Jamie Lynn and people like that saying, this is what we should be supporting.
And it works right away. I think people are fired up on the magazine right when you launch. You don't have trouble selling ads or anything like that.
It was new. So even though it had that level of support, the advertisers, and I get it, are resistant as long as they can be to spending extra money. So once it becomes, they don't have a choice, you're not going to go away, then everybody comes in, you know? So like it took us 2 years or more of publication before Burton finally came in. Now they're our front and side supporter. They've been there for more than 10 years in that position at least. And I had no beef with them at the time. I got it. They're not looking to spend $1,000 more per year on anything if they don't have to. So I was just like, we have to outlast that. And we did.
Now it is time for me to get into my final set of sponsors, and I'm going to start with Spy Optic. Spy has spent the past 25 years innovating the sunglass game, but more importantly, they've spent 25 years making you look good. The artists, athletes, and designers over at Spy not only live and breathe the action sports lifestyle, they like to party and try new things. And the newest of new is the 50/50 collection. Spy took the iconic frames, the Flynn, Discord, Cyrus, and Helm, and took their bottoms off. Literally. They stripped down these popular frames, leaving them semi-rimless and ready for some action. It's an awesome upgrade to the glasses I already love. And if you wear sunglasses and listen to this podcast, support me, save some money, and make yourself look good by heading over to Spy Optic, pick out some sunglasses. I highly recommend the Helm 50/50. Head to checkout and save 20% by entering the code POWEL20. That's all one word and the number 20. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing my favorite Northwest beer since 2006. And since they started brewing beer, they've been supporting the sports we love. If you aren't sure about what they've done in action sports, well, I'll tell you. They are the first beer brand to produce their own ski and snowboard movie. They support a team of A-list athletes. They throw a series of hella big air events. They have signature beers that donate to causes like Protect Our Winters. And they are supporting the big Proving Grounds Rampage qualifier in Bend this September. If all of that isn't cool enough, the people that work at 10 Barrel, they're all skiers, snowboarders, and bikers. And if you want to find out a lot more about the company and what goes on behind the scenes, well, they have their own podcast, Fully Aligned, and it's available wherever you get your podcasts, and it'll make you think a lot more about what you drink. Next time you head to the store, make sure you buy the beer that supports action sports. Pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel. Those are my sponsors, and now we will jump back into the podcast. One other question about brands and questioning what you're doing. Did they ever question you being located in Bellingham instead of a hub like Southern California or Boulder?
I think at very first it was more so when we were just the one title. And Baker is kind of ebbed and flowed culturally a bit. So Craig died pretty early on. We did his last interview. And then there was a bit of an ebb with Baker. In terms of the writing itself, and in terms of us, the people that are there, there's never been an ebb. But in terms of like how the industry would perceive it or pro writers and all that. So it was kind of like maybe a second tier spot at that point. And everything was still in California. You know, you had Snowboarder Transworld operating really strong. Snowboard Life popped up out of the blue, kind of used our, we ended up sending the cease and desist because like, look, we've had Snowboard's Journal on the cover for, not Snowboard Life, Snowboard Journal. Sorry, those guys launched Snowboard Journal. And I'm fine in good terms with Jason Ford and John Foster now.
They got it.
It's a combat sport. So we were a little bit of an outlier at that point for sure. And then Portland was like the cool place. You know, the Grenade kids moved to Portland. Yep. And I thought about moving there after Sun Valley rather than Seattle. But my roots are up here. And I wanted to be at Baker. I wanted to ride Baker. And it's a great place to be based out of. I knew it at the time. It was like, we've got this college. So you've got this captive audience of kids who are just fired up, you know, like I was back then to do this kind of thing. So we've got a great flow of internship and being that close to the young part of that culture. And it's easy to operate on. UPS is 3 blocks away, the main one. If I need to go to the airport, pick somebody up or go fly somewhere, it's 5 miles away. It's easy peasy. I don't sit in traffic. They thought of this as being out in the weeds a bit, but now Bellingham's like the freaking coolest place to be apparently, where it's like, it's great, but it's changed in the last 10 years too.
And in those first 5 years, I'm sure it's a struggle because, I mean, you're a new business owner and you're trying to pay employees, pay yourself, and I'm sure a lot of your money goes into the publication and into travel and everything. When do you finally start feeling comfortable where it's like you can get a new truck or something?
It was years and years. I mean, I didn't pay myself to start with. Jess and I put all of the money into, we hustled other jobs. I was still working for Snowboarder on the side. Sullivan hired me back again because he needed some content, and I always had a good relationship with him. And he was just cool enough to see that as not being threatening to them, and being associated with me and with being with this was going to be beneficial to Snowboarder. And I think it was. But we didn't take a dime out of it for at least 5 years, I don't think. The first decent truck of my life, I bought about 4 years ago. So, yeah, it just takes you 15 years.
Well, you're a snowboarder with a successful magazine at this point. You're definitely going to make it. It's been 6 years in and you see the future. And there's an idea for the ski journal. Why don't we do this on the ski side? We can. You still have a passion for skiing as well. And whose idea is it to create a ski magazine?
Honestly, from the start of launching the snowboard title, I've been around publishing enough to know that like once you develop an advertising client base, once you develop a distribution base, it's half the work to do the next one.
Yeah, I would think it's easy.
And I knew that a ski journal would be as viable, if not more, than a snowboard journal. And I still love skiing. So I was waiting for the right time to do that as much as anything. So Gunnarsson came on, Chris Kaela came on, and we did that first issue and got great response to it.
Did you bring in the Jerk and Max too?
Jerk came in a bit. He was helpful for sure. Max was up here for a minute. He's always been a great ally of the publication period. So I brought him out of Transworld. He came up here for a while, and he was helpful to us for sure. So then we were fully vested in winter sport at that point with all the challenges and benefits.
Yeah, I would think. I mean, you know all the writers, you know all the photographers, you know all the brands now because you're advertising on the snowboard side. A lot of this is crossover. So I would think, yeah, like you said, it's half the work because you've already created that base, you know, those relationships. The magazine is a similar publication, very nice and what you would expect from Funny Feelings. And I don't even know where I'm going with this, to tell you the truth. I will look into my notes to see where I was going with this. Oh, yeah. It becomes a lot easier. Are you able to pull in twice the money now that you've got 2 publications?
No. Not certainly for like the first couple of years. You're pulling some more revenue in, but it costs money to develop all that stuff. You know, it costs money to develop a new retail base. It costs money. Even though you're going to some of the same trade shows, you still got to go see. DNStar is not going to be in your snowboard mix. So you got to get out there. And then with frequency, I knew that either needed Burton or Mervyn on board to begin with. And I knew ultimately we'd need both. So was hugely disappointing when we couldn't get Burton on, but I knew we'd get him eventually if we stuck with it. And then Pete and Mike were on board right away with LibTech. LibTech's been at every issue. So you got to have at least one of those guys to anchor it with to start with.
Bread and butter brand that you can count on.
Right. And even if they're not in there 10 years later, you have to have that to start with. And fortunately, Burton and Lib have been huge, huge supporters for the last 15 years plus. And then on the ski side, it was K2. It's obvious. They're the American ski brand, especially at that time. And we've got to get them on board. And Matt Wibby, our sales guy, had interned at K2 originally back in the day.
I used to ride the bus on Vashon with him.
I hold K2 interns in high regard because I've seen them go very far in this industry in a lot of cases. So we're talking about it and we're like, we got to get their attention a bit. And the thing I didn't necessarily want to do was be another guy humping down there, going across the ferry, going into the office and being like, hey guys, how about you spend some more money, you know? And especially at that time and that brand and those people, they're going to be open to being a little bit more engaged. So my buddy was a pilot. He's still a pilot out of Bellingham. And I like flying. I hate being stuck on the freeway. It was ski to ski weekend. So I knew it was like, it'd take us forever to get down there. And then it was going to take more than forever to get back up. We had the meeting on a Friday set up and I was like, let's get to Travis and see if we can fly down. What's that going to cost? I think it was less than $400 or something. And I researched, I'm like, oh, there's an airstrip on Vashon. Let's do this. And he agreed. Then he calls me back like the day before. He's like, it's a grass strip, man. He didn't tell me it's a grass strip. And I was just like, pussy, I've landed on snow before. Let's do this, you know? So when I called him and told us he had to come pick us up, he was kind of frustrated. He was just like, what, you're too cheap to take your car on the ferry, you know? And I was like, no, we're going to land at the strip. You got to come pick us up. And so he came and met us. Then we went into the little bar in Vashon and talked, shared a picture. And then he was like, yeah, we're doing this. I think he may have actually signed at that point. He may have signed like on Monday, but he looked at it. Was like, yeah, we're on board. We're doing this.
So you had someone believing in you and you're like, all right, we're going to do this. And you launch at a great time because a year into it, you have a recession.
Yeah. We launched that and then bought this place, our current space, within 12 months of each other. And then the recession just, like, you know, November 2008.
When a recession hits, the first thing that gets cut from brands is art and advertisements.
Yeah, it becomes more of a hustle. But I'll say this. Bad economies don't scare me. And I kind of like bad economies because you can make way more ground in a bad economy than you can in a good economy. In a good economy, everyone's doing well. Boat's floating high for everyone. So you got to swim that much harder upstream to get there. Versus if everybody's running scared, you can run more fearless at least. People pay attention to that and you can make more ground. So we had no choice. So it's like, let's get our backs up and we're not going anywhere. And Matt, I expect you to sell more ads this year. And he did.
So you're able to weather the storm there. And then I don't know what year the Fly Fish Journal launches. Is it 2009 that comes out?
Yeah, 2009.
With that, I look at it as a totally different direction for you. I mean, still a passion of yours. You grew up fishing and you're really into fishing. I think that's why Ketchum was so attractive to you. When you get into this business, it's counter-seasonal. You need something to balance out your life. And you finally have something. But you're also in an industry that is not like snow, where it's snow dependent. You're in an industry that has 400 specialty retailers compared to 20, and there's a lot more opportunity for the brand. And is that what you see with fly fishing when you're entering that market?
No, that stuff I was kind of blissfully unaware of. It's worked out really well. It's a very healthy industry in a lot of ways. I mean, from the start, I had that in the back of my mind, like skiing, where it was like, okay, you know, multi-titles make sense. Skiing's an obvious. We're going to be in winter sports. There's no reason for us not to do both. And at some point, if you're that vested in winter sports, you better get a summer job. So that was basically it. It's like, we need a summer job. And I loved fishing. I mean, at that point, I was probably at this point still, I'm maybe more engaged with fishing than I am with winter sports. So for me personally, an easy jump off, and I really wanted to do it. And I knew that it was going to be revenue at the time of year we needed revenue. So it was a very good business decision on our part.
When it was just snow, did you have a couple months off in the summer? And then when you pick up the Fly Fish Journal, it's like, all right, we're all hands on deck all year long.
Yeah, that was pretty much, I mean, it was slow down a bit more from April through July, more so than now, than where we have an issue that comes out. We're doing production on a fly issue at that point. But yeah, it made sense as well that, you know, we got a bigger footprint. We may as well fill it out.
Are you able to sell more physical copies at retail since you're in the fly fishing world with a lot of retailers compared to the snow world where they might not buy as many $12 magazines?
There's not much winter retail.
Yeah.
So like you said, there's 20 retail stores or something. So it's a different deal. The retail, I would guess that the consumers find winter retail less mandatory than in fly fishing. It took me a while to figure out why that would be, because it's a much smaller base. I think fly fishing is probably less than a third or more, maybe like a quarter or something of skiing and snowboarding combined. Less. I think it's more like a fifth in terms of participants. So why would they have way, way, way more retail than these two industries, which are way, way, way more dollars? Skiing and snowboarding is a social sport that you make that connection at the ski area. You know, everybody rides lifts together. You're talking lift lines. You're talking the tap room. Fly fishermen want to get the hell away from each other and catch fish, but they still want to get together and talk about that awesome fish that they caught. You know, and you can do this all online, but at the end of the day, those guys want to drink a beer and show them their, you know, or drink a coffee or wherever they have in the shop and show their photos to their buddy. And if you want intel, if you want to know like what's going on and like what bugs are eating and stuff, you got to go to a shop.
Yeah, just to get the local beta.
Right. Here's how you learn what fish are eating. When you look at the fly boxes, the one that's empty is the one that they're eating.
Okay.
You're not going to get that online. So you have to go to fly shops in a lot of ways if you're a fly fisherman. So it's natural that we'd have a bigger retail base with that.
When you break out the size of the publications, what percentage is fly fish? What percentage is ski? What percentage is snowboard? If you're allowed to talk about that.
Well, I mean, you know, some of these things should keep a little proprietary,
Yeah,
but for the most part, you know, I'm not too afraid of open source here. It also changes. So there'll be a time period where like Baker was in a bit of a lull. You know, the snowboard title might be in a little bit of a lull. Now 3 snowboard titles die off and everyone wants to be in the Northwest. That's come back up. But fly fishing is strong. I will just say that fly fishing, that culture, I'm impressed with that culture. I'm impressed with that industry. And the winter industry could learn a few things from that side of the equation for sure.
One thing with all of the magazines right now, the digital world is huge in terms of promoting, in terms of retaining people. And I would say what you guys have done has built a loyal subscription-based following. You're also at retail, but with your coffee table, really nice publication. It's one of those things people aren't afraid to subscribe to, and they do that. But in the digital world, you're one of those, I won't say that pushes away technology, because I don't know you that much. I mean, I heard your first Frequency magazine, you wanted to hand lay it out completely. And everybody was like, dude, what are you, fucking crazy?
Yeah, I have an interesting relationship with technology. I'm definitely not afraid of it.
I hear you know all about it. You could talk to people about social and metrics and this and that. But when it comes to actually scrolling through your phone, that's not where you're going to be.
No, I got tendonitis, man. I need to put the phone down. I'm serious. Like, I play squash, I play golf, and I can't do any of those things or fly fish right now because my tendonitis in my elbow is so bad. So the more I can not look at my phone, the better off I am. But I'm a communications major. I'm not a journalism major. I'm a communications major. So I studied a ton of theory on communication and Marshall McLuhan and all that stuff. So it all deeply fascinates me. The meta aspects of it are a lot more interesting to me than whether it's MySpace one day, Instagram the next day, Facebook the next day. And that stuff's all malleable. It's all going to change. It's more about the meta of what that means. Where is this going? What culturally does this mean to people? And then how do we apply what we're doing to that? And to be honest, I think not having my head stuffed in the details and weeds of that gives me a little better perspective to step back. And also, I don't get attached to these things. So I listen to the interns. A 19-year-old kid comes in and says, like, yeah, I don't really do that platform. This is, you know, I pick up on that. I don't necessarily immediately go, okay, we're switching to this now. But not being terribly vested in any one technology has allowed me to keep making sure we're moving forward at all times.
Do you guys have a plan for digital growth? Because you can look at the landscape of magazines. Your landscape has gotten less competitive because there's brands that are out. You're selling against less people and a lot of different things happened. And maybe the brands that didn't embrace digital and were purchased by other people, maybe if they had embraced it more and done more, they could still be around. Do you see the need for a big digital plan moving forward?
I believe in anarchy.
Okay.
And I think that the media landscape right now is anarchy. And I am totally comfortable with that. So, no, I think that the major publications, the major publishers in this space made a strategic error by dumping tons of money into Facebook and tons of money into areas where they're trying to pump up their metrics that were not monetizing for them. I mean, the basics of business haven't changed. Are you selling something? Did somebody buy it? Did somebody give you money for that? Is there money in your account sufficient to pay to do it again? That's really all there is to it at the end of the day. So it's one thing if you're a speculative investor investing in intellectual capital and you're saying, okay, I'm going to throw $100 million out there and I'm going to expect that 98% of these are going to eat it. And 2% of them are going to make sense, and they're going to make a ton of money, and they're going to outstrip all these others. That's a gamble. And for guys that get good at it, I imagine they do quite well. Most people that are in business aren't that. If you start operating a small business, anything under 20 million is a small business. If you start operating along the lines as if you were a speculative investor, you're going to lose. And that's just basically what a lot of these guys did. We were never afraid of technology. I just wanted to make sure that we were able to integrate it in ways that made sense and the ways that would allow us to at least within 24 months start producing some form of revenue off that rather than just bleeding money. It's all about brand equity. Once the brand is strong enough and people believe in it, let's start doing videos. Let's build an AV program. Now we're doing great films. Like we just got done doing a Critical Pebble Mine movie up in Bristol Bay with Patagonia and New Belgium and Yakima, Iraq supporting it. And that's the kind of thing I'm excited about. I honestly, I love print and everything, but that's on autopilot now. So I'm more interested and excited about, even though I don't have social media accounts myself, what we can do with that.
Yeah.
And what we can do with AV and starting to get into podcasts, stuff like that. So you have to be media ninja. You have to be fully engaged digitally to have a chance to keep going. And I wouldn't say we're totally there now, but no one is because it's evolving so fast. It's anarchy. Nobody knows. If you try and spend enough money to get on top of it, you will lose your ass.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's anarchy. So it's more a matter of operating the space of being the Grateful Dead of media than trying to be the Rolling Stones of media.
Yeah, that's a good take on it. Finally, one thing in the magazine world, I know back in the day, people would start publications, they'd eventually get bought out and they'd get rich. I don't think that's the landscape of publications anymore, and I don't think that was ever your intention. It's probably to build something and have your own property. But is having these 3 magazines something that you're going to be able to either sell and retire or just retire and have a happy lifestyle? You're going to be working forever.
I don't know, man. I'm thinking about that. I think that I could sell these at some point and go back to writing. You know, ultimately I'm a writer and that's what I like doing. I like my job I have right now. So it would have to be something that would be significant to move me off that, you know, but I got a 5-year-old kid and there's other things I want to do as well. And I never aimed to do this forever. So, you know, we'll see. But, you know, at this point I'm happy doing it, but I'm not going to do it forever. And at some point I want to go back to being a writer.
Okay. Well, at this point in the show, I have something called Inappropriate Questions.
I've heard about these.
And I get someone who knows you to ask you 3 inappropriate questions. I went with one of your employees. Probably not the best thing to do. Matt Wibby, who is a K2.
I somehow guessed that this was going to be the case.
So I went to Wibby, and he gave me 3 questions, which are just so weak. So I have some other ones.
You need somebody who didn't write a check to.
Exactly. I was thinking about that. I was like, oh man, Wibby works for him, so that's why these questions are going to be so weak. I am going to pull them up right now, and we will go with question number 1 from Matt Wibby.
With folks preparing to storm Area 51 this coming September, have you been to Area 51? Have you been close?
All right, so a really inappropriate one there from Wibby.
Right.
Have you been to Area 51? And if that's the sexual position, then that would make it totally fine for inappropriate questions, but it's not.
Yes, I have been to Area 51. I went there really early on after the trade show when it was in Vegas. So it'd been like early 90s with Chris Bronkhart, Matt Donahue, and then Mark Farmer, Asian X, good friend of mine who's like just this amazing nutball dude. And he's from Alaska originally. He lives in Japan now. He's like this 6'2" bald guy that's studying the Japanese tea ceremony in Osaka now. He shot the first photos of Area 51 from like a ridge that the government since reclaimed. You know, every once in a while I'll see him on like alien shows and stuff still.
Are you an alien guy?
You know, it was interesting. It was interesting stuff. We did drive up to like where, you know, it says a lethal force will happen and then the dudes will come out in the Pinkerton Jeeps and tell you to get lost. And it was cool though, yeah.
Not very inappropriate. There's a big storm, I think, on like September 20th or 21st. We are going to go to question number 2 from Matt Wibby.
Describe what it's like to go snowboarding in Alaska with Farmer in the early cowboy days.
I heard that you, Farmer, and a guy named Sid took a trip to Alaska. Sid might have been a little piece of paper that you put on your tongue.
Certainly there were experiences in Alaska in that time. I wouldn't disclaim that if it's true. I can't remember like what was consumed in Alaska and what was not consumed in Alaska.
What's traveling with Farmer like?
It's warfare. It's awesome.
Are you shaking your head a lot? Like, I can't believe he said that.
Well, I mean, at the time, the first trips I did with Farmer and Parada, and I lived with Hetzel, and I traveled around with Palmer and saw all manner of violence and craziness. Yeah. I mean, the best farmer story I remember, this would have been Baker in the 80s, I think, late 80s. I think Ranko had gotten together with one of his girlfriends or something, is the story I heard. And Ranko was all just totally passed out in his bed. And he folded up the hide bed on Ranko and then tied it with a rope, like tight, on a really good powder day, and then hid all the knives in the house.
Oh.
That was like kind of the daily kind of deal with farmer. I don't know, man.
All right, we're going to jump into our last awful, inappropriate question from Matt Wibby, who just walked in the office.
Are 80-year-old squash players at the local YMCA still beating you?
It is competitive. It is competitive. There's an 85-year-old guy down there who is my absolute hero called the Dean. And he shoots his age in golf, walks 18 holes, and can play competitive squash, which is ridiculous if you've ever seen or played squash at that level. And the challenge with playing the Dean is we all feel obligated to give the Dean a little bit. But as soon as you give the Dean a little bit, the Dean takes you. You get beat by an 85-year-old guy, and then what are you going to say? You know?
Yeah.
There are 70-year-olds there, that 70-plus-year-olds that absolutely beat me legitimately. They've been playing for 20-plus years. I've been playing for like 4 or 5 years. So, yeah, I get beat up by old men all the time at the YMCA.
All right, and I will jump in with one more inappropriate question, which should be inappropriate, I believe. What's the best and worst thing that you've ever seen in Mexico? Have you been to like a Tijuana show?
Yeah, I haven't been. I've never seen anything like serious degradation.
Like donkey shows?
No,
monkeys?
Just myself, just wandering aimlessly down the streets of Tijuana, just blowing out tequila and street tacos after a particularly great episode. It was when I was interning at Transworld, and I went down with some guys I was living with. I just blew off work. Because one day I really just like blew it off that year, and maybe a couple days for surf, but literally just called in from Tijuana. And like Kevin Kinnear picks up, he's like, "Are you calling in drunk?" And I'm like, "Well, not, we just got here, And yeah, end of the day, that was a rough border crossing home.
So that's inappropriate questions. And when I think of good print these days, I think of your publications. There's a lot of magazines that I have that just when I'm done reading them, I throw them away. Yours end up living at my house forever. And I think it's a great time to let everybody know how they subscribe to your magazine, which would be...
Online is the easiest. It's, the snowboardersjournal.com, the skijournal.com, or the flyfishjournal.com.
And now is the time to subscribe because winter is right around the corner. You do a great job at what you're doing. You've had an amazing life, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. My first issue ships next week.
So that was time with Jeff Galbraith, a dude who carved out a space in the busy world of print, and he made it his own. These days, his world of media is not about carving out anything. Most of the competition has disappeared as the medium that Jeff is arguably king of in the world of snow is changing. He's been able to weather the storm in the past, and there's no sound of panic or even concern that the digital realm is a threat to his existence. And so far, the best print has survived, and the best print is Jeff Galbraith. That's the show for this week. I want to thank you for listening, ask you to review me on whatever platform you listen to me on, and support my great sponsors. They are Evo, Stanley, Spy Optic, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.